we would be remiss if we didn't talk about where it's possibly gone a bit wrong, or how the positioning of these changes has could have been maybe done better. There's a lot of commentary around climate and carbon targets being completely pushed by the wayside, as well as looking at cutting of corners in the consultation process. I'd like to go to the panel for your views on where things haven't been done exactly correctly, and what your views are on that. I'd like to start with Laith, if that's okay.
Sorry guys, is that unmuted now yet? Look, I think we're throwing back to it again. We haven't changed anything, and I don't think there's a loss of control, a full loss of control to the council. The councils can still, they still have, there is a checklist that they have to go through. There's still rely on external appearance. There's still a number of things they have to go through. Obviously, there are issues around climate and carbon targets and cutting corners and consultation, because you don't have to consult with residents. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. Now, that's where we find unscrupulous developers, and that's what they'll do. Now, for us as a leading edge developer, we will not change our approach. We will still, because we're into buildings, we still have to consult with people. They're as important as anyone in this whole process, the people that live in the building. Now, it's okay for me to say that, right? Because that's what I do, but someone else might not. But look, for us, it's essentially the same process. We consult, we follow design, we run through the process, and I think that's my take on it. Now, the biggest thing is there are gaps for people to take advantage of it, and if there's a way of closing that down, then fantastic, because it will not affect the way we work.
Thank you. Brendan, what do you think about these apparent lack of safeguards in the new changes?
I mean, the thing is, where things went badly before was really around quality, and probably the easiest one to understand is space standards. You know, sort of very inadequate provision of space for people to live in, and that's an easy thing to pick on, and it's an easy thing to get right as well. I mean, it could just be that the space standards just need to be the national space standards need to apply, and you can still convert the building. It's not necessarily, you know, beyond us just to include that, and I think most councils now, particularly the Article 4 guys, will be doing that anyway. So the lack of consultation is a concern, but I think the overriding concern is on the carbon side. I think that the sustainability agenda, we signed up to the Paris Agreement, zero carbon by 2050, 50% by 2030, 10 years to go and counting. We have to think differently. We have to really think differently and more creatively about how we are going to use our existing assets and how we are going to control the shape of our cities going forward that deal with these obligations, which are for us all, not just the construction sector, but for society at large. And I think that permitted development of this type and the redevelopment of any buildings needs to take that into account if it is to be successful in the long term. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want long-term success for these buildings. So what would I fix? I'd fix the space standards, and I'd fix the carbon dimension, because I think those are the two things that are going to give us the greatest future.
Thanks, Brendan, for that practical viewpoint there. Gill, what are your thoughts on some of the contestation around the rights?
Yeah, I completely agree with Brendan. It's, we've seen how light has been able to be weaved into the PDRs very easily. And so many people, so many professionals from all sides of the sector are calling for space standards to be included. It seems to me simple to make a quick legal amendment to bring space standards into the developments, because it's so critical to quality. I have a real drive promoting health and well-being in planning and in property, and we've seen through lockdown how important our accommodation is, and the size of that accommodation is critical. We've addressed light through this recent set of changes, let's just get space sorted as well, because it's just a really, fundamental matter, and it's the people who don't have a voice who are more likely to be living in this accommodation. So those of us who do have a voice should be exercising it fully. So, I just think it's something that has to get sorted out swiftly.
Thank you. Anita, would you agree?
Completely. I think just to balance out, I suspect the reason why the government wanted to use PDRs is that statistically 60,000 new homes have been created using permitted development rights. So I'm not surprised they wanted to follow this route, but I absolutely agree with Brendan and Gill that it's unfortunate that the concerns over space and quality of living haven't made it into the actual sort of wording of the legislation. Now, the big criticism is that the government has actually gone against its own expert advice, and 2/3 of consultees who've all said we don't actually think these specific PDRs written in the way that they are at the moment in law will fix our concerns over quality of living, space standards, things like that. There are a couple kind of more legal considerations, legal ways I think this has gone wrong. Just on a philosophical level, these permitted development rights, some commentators are saying it could hurt the delivery of affordable housing, because it kind of bypasses that planning requirement in big resi developments for affordable housing. You also the council will lose on affordable housing contributions that they could be using to deliver more local infrastructure. For example, we all know how Section 106 contributions are used to help the wider local infrastructure. So that's been another criticism of these particular PDRs. Could it lead to less infrastructure? So with space, yes, the legislation does have a little bit of detail on space, but it only looks at limiting maximum internal height from floor to ceiling, but it's completely missed any other space consideration. So I think that's another criticism, really. It could have been addressed through the legislation, but sadly it hasn't.
Thanks, Anita. The REBA has been a quite vocal challenger of the rights, and the statement has been made by their president that there's no evidence that the planning system is to blame for a shortage of housing. Can I just get the panel's view on a statement like that? Do you think it's accurate? Do you think it needs to be couched with something else? What are your thoughts around that? I will start with Gill, if that's good.
I was going to suggest Brendan has that breadth of experience to give us a view from what the RIBA are going to be thinking. I think it's a really tricky one to answer. I think picking up on the quality of accommodation is just so critical, and the planning system is so important to make sure the development coming through is acceptable and suitable. So when we're hacking away at it, what are the consequences of that? They're really massive. So it's just such a complex beast. I'm going to pass across to Brendan, who'll probably have a much more eloquent answer.
I'm not sure that I have a more eloquent answer, because I do feel that is a little bit of a silver bullet response from the RIBA. I think planning has played a part in some of the problems that we have, but then so have the architects, and so has the entire economy and the sector that we work in. Nobody is immune from contributing to some of the problems that we have, and everybody is obliged to participate in finding solutions. So I think his statement is a little bit inaccurate and a little bit too political for my liking, but that's sort of what we expect from the RIBA, I'm afraid. But I think what's important is that the professional bodies do really need to step up. They need to step up and make demands not just of their own members, but of the economy in which they're working, of developers, of contractors, and those who perhaps have cut corners at times, but also when local authorities are just being stubborn and difficult and not necessarily cooperating and trying to facilitate delivery. I think that needs to be challenged as well, and I think NIMBYism needs to be challenged too, because that's ultimately where a lot of problems arise from, where the community themselves, in a blindfolded kind of way, where they don't have to take personal responsibility, are creating problems that for the rest of society will have to deal with. So the singular nature of the statement from the RIBA is inaccurate, but there is a role for all of us.
Thank you, Brendan. Laith, what do you make of that sort of viewpoint from RIBA?
I think when you read it, you can see what the key element to take out of that is the shortage of housing. You know, everyone agrees we have a shortage of housing, and if there's a way that we can deliver more homes, and I think as Anita said, 60,000 homes delivered under permitted development, then if we can find a way to regulate it properly and deliver homes for people to live in, then fantastic. Why not? I mean, RIBA are always going to come out with big, bold statements because that sort of thing looks good on the front of a newspaper. You know, for me, there's shortage of homes, land is scarce. What do we want to do? Do we want to build on greenfield, or do we want to build on top of buildings? Oh, we shouldn't build on top of buildings, it's intensification. Okay, greenfield, we shouldn't be building on greenfields because it's greenfields. You know, NIMBYism, absolutely, all the way around. There's always going to be someone that is going to question development. And look, RIBA have come out with a bold statement, and hopefully it will come through sort of the consultation and the next process, and we'll all understand that actually there are more homes required, and if we can deliver them through community development, then it's obviously a good tool.
Thanks a lot. Anita, do you think statements like this need a bit more qualification, especially in the press?
I think as a lawyer, we always qualified over everything that we say. But sorry, coming back to RIBA's statement, I can understand why they said it. You know, clearly the driver behind it was a real concern for what happens to quality of life through these permitted development rights. You know, without the space standards, etc. You know, what happens when you introduce a new resi use into an industrial use? Is that into an industrial area? Is that right? You know, I can get why they said that, but absolutely agree with Brendan, Gill, and Laith. We've got to qualify that, because look again at the legislation. There are checks and balances. The government is trying. Yes, granted, it's not perfect. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that needs to go through prior approval is the developers actually have to submit details and an assessment, I'm just having a look at the wording here, of the impacts of introducing a residential use into a particular commercial or industrial area. So there is that check if there is a concern on that basis. But yes, the checks don't go far enough. So on balance, I agree with the spirit that it's not perfect, that it needs to be improved, but I don't think it's disgraceful, which I think is the word that was used.
Thanks very much, Anita. Just picking up on something that Laith mentioned around competing rights between building out into different belts, and then also the densification or greater densification that is resultant of this vertical expansion. Can I just open up that topic for the panel to discuss their thoughts on what this means and how we can possibly mitigate kind of the more butting of heads? Gill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the thought process around PDR, as we've already mentioned, is that the government almost grant planning permission for the principle of development and then go away and sort out the technical details between the applicants and the local authority. So, you know, I think this is a good thing that we are looking to intensively use our land better and more efficiently. If we can do it with the right checks and balances, that's what needs to happen, because there's, you know, all of us driving around our urban areas, I'm sure we can see a multitude of sites that can cope with more development. And I think we just need to be providing the right development, be taking communities with us, be taking the local authority with us, you know, providing the right kind of housing, because then it turns the dial down on all the massive opposition, because those opposing parties probably have got a good point to make on the bad end of the spectrum development. So if everyone's promoting good development that's improving communities, it's creating healthy cities, people should and hopefully will start supporting that more. But it's because of this wide range of the development spectrum and the controversial nature of planning that everyone puts the stir in and stirs it all up, but actually we're only harming and affecting ourselves and our kids and our ability to function as a society. So I just think we all need to pull together massively and sort some of these problems out and start getting the right development through in the right places. So I'll have to turn my dial down on doing my Gill rant and pass over to somebody for another view. Thank you.
Another good rant, and you're absolutely right. Anita, would you want to take the baton of the rant on?
I think we need both. I don't see why there needs to be a butting of heads, really. I mean, with major cities across the world, there's always going to be stresses in terms of building outwards, and lots of cities, take Singapore for example. Building upwards has been going on for decades because of space constraints. So it's not like we're dealing with a new concept as a global community. So I think, where there is a planning case, certainly, and where you can, as a developer, fit within the legal parameters of rights or the need for planning permission, I think my advice is, whatever you can make the case for and whatever you fit into, then do it by all means, especially in these times when the government is clearly trying to help, albeit imperfectly.
Thank you. Brendan, thoughts?
There are competing rights, and I think that, and particularly planners, I think, are constrained by their own policies that may be in the process of change, but it does take time for things to change. And I can think of two examples, both of which we've been involved in. One is putting a large residential development into a failing retail park, and it's tricky. Don't get me. This is a complicated proposition. And to be fair to the local authority, they can see it's complicated and they actually want to help as much as they can. But the level of help and support that they can provide, that is legally limited. So even if the heart is willing, the law says no. And I think those sort of dynamics, those are the things that we could address or improve, where we can see that there is merit in the idea. Yes, checks and balances. Yes, all of these things. But the constraint comes from constraint, or the stalling comes from places which are not actually inherent to the site itself, but to a more general position, and that makes it very, very difficult. And then on the other extreme, working within a town that had developed its own neighbourhood plan and done the referendum and all the rest of it, and they did a great job. And there was a few design codes in there. It was really a comprehensive piece of work, but they were too scared to nominate enough development sites. So when it went to the planning inspectorate, they said there's not enough sites. So therefore, the route through appeal is now permanently open. So all the hard work done on creating that plan and all the public consultation and the great democratic process that went into that was completely, not completely undone, but was compromised because they didn't have the courage to say, you know what, we do need X amount of houses. Let's find those sites and make that an anchor point of this position. So, it does take a bit of courage, and there has to be compromise. And here we have two examples where actually great intent and limited through powers which are not actually inherent to the situation right there. So those sort of dynamics could be improved, I think.
Thank you, Brendan. Laith, do you want to conclude this particular section just with an expansion on some of your ideas around the competing rights?
Yeah, obviously I said before, we can see that there's always going to be an intensification of cities. That's something all over the world. We've seen Singapore, as Anita alluded to. Airspace then upon extensions, we're looking at it in a large level. We're also looking at building on top of all different types of buildings. We're looking at building on top of big commercial operations. Now, this is a way of housing people. Hundreds of thousands of people are homeless. Councils spent like hundreds of millions of pounds on temporary accommodation. There's a way we can build homes on top of existing buildings that councils own. We can do this on existing buildings that housing associations own to deliver affordable housing. It may not be a permitted development, but we can still do it. Now, once again, it comes back to NIMBYism. You're not really going to want someone to build a couple of stories next door to you, are you? Because you haven't got that. The same goes with Greenfield. If you're out and you're in a really nice little sort of country village and you've got it's a big field, no one wants to have 300 homes put there, especially when there's going to be affordable. Those horrible affordable people. That's what they say. But it's that balance and understanding that we're a growing population. We need to house people. We need to put people into homes for them to live. Now, some people want to live out in the fields. Some people want to live in the city. So we have to have that balance, and by intensifying somewhere like central London, I think it's a positive thing if it's done properly. If we follow all the protocols, we look at good design, space standards, daylight, sunlight, everything like that, which is what we do when we're an airspace developer. We make sure we do all of that, and we're working with a number of good planning consultancies and architects, and we know that. So look, that's my view, is as long as there's good design and it's good design led, then there shouldn't really be an issue.
Caron, can I just quickly add two points just to follow up on Laith and Brendan? The first thing is that these permitted rights to build upwards, you can't actually use them on land that's got special designation. So you can't use them in conservation. They don't apply to listed buildings. So that, in terms of greenbelt and things like that, again, developers, just like we've all been saying all morning, do your checks first on special designations. The second thing is, a big criticism of these upward extension PDRs is that it's a way of bypassing local planning authority site allocations, because it just allows you to introduce a resi use into potentially an area that's not allocated for that. So that I think is also a source of tension. Just got to be aware of that.
Thanks, Anita, for pointing that out. I have a question from one of our viewers, which goes as follows. Is the right to add 2 floors to a building applicable to a site that has planning but has not yet been built? Anita, would you like to take that one?
So if you're a developer and you've got a site that has been granted planning permission, but you have done nothing to start discharging pre-commencement conditions, you don't even start building, then theoretically there's nothing stopping you from going out there and applying for another consent for something else. That's always been the rule. Ultimately your planning permission just exists as part of the planning history of the site. It's a different answer, obviously, if you've started building out, but I know that's not your question. Very, very quickly, Caron, still could be applicable, just be careful. And with PDRs, you could also end up needing a Section 106 agreement as well. So just bear that in mind in terms of timescales and cost. Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. So that concludes, I guess, the formal agenda for the conversation. I just want to quickly whip around the panel to see if there's any last final comments that you'd like to add for the people watching right now, and then also those who'll be able to access this webinar after it's been published. Brendan, can we go to you just for any final thoughts on the permitted development rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think the from a design perspective, as an architect, I think the thing that we would most want to see applied are the space standards and the design standards, but I think that they need to be improved. A lot of local authorities are allergic to studios. I don't know why, because they're very popular in the market, but there's certain sort of seems to be sentimental restrictions on certain types of things. I think we need a broadening of space standards away from to allow different product to come to market. So I would like to see good space standards, but also that facilitate a better range of product than we have right now in housing. And I think that that wider range will then make some of these PDR schemes more easy from a viability perspective and even from a design perspective. So we need to improve our standards. It would be my call.
Wonderful, thank you. Laith, final comments from you?
I mean, I agree with Brendan in terms of space standards. We always meet under the design guide or minimum space standards. We will do on all of our permit developments. That's because we think that's the right thing to do. If something was put in there that prescribed that, then obviously I think that would help. That goes hand in hand with daylight sunlight, which is in there as well. I think if you're looking at getting into this and doing this, it's not as easy as it seems. It's literally not just throwing 2 stories on top of a building. There are a lot of due diligence you have to follow. You need to have a good architect, good planning consultant, and a good lawyer. I can see 3 right here. And you just need to make sure that you know what you're doing, because you can get caught out at quite a few points in the process. And if anyone out there is looking at building on top of their buildings, feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you, Laith. Gill, anything to conclude with from you?
Yeah, so same points which are coming through from the panel about the need for good space. I thought it was interesting, Laith's point, that he's actually still often going down the planning application route, notwithstanding the PDR. So that's interesting because there's a clause about the external appearance being considered. I guess you'd need to play it safe if you're wanting to use your PDR and probably have matching materials. Whereas actually it'd be great and cool if we're having modern, contemporary, light touch additions to our buildings, which might be difficult to execute through PDR because of the way it's written. So maybe planning applications actually achieve more what you want in any event. And as we've all touched on like mad, proceed with caution. There's lots of tripwires, stroke, nitty gritty bits to do your homework on. So just reiterating that last point.
Thank you, Gill. Any last comments, Anita?
Yes, I think it would be a shame if clients are feeling sort of downhearted or depressed about all this. That's not the panel's intention. The key thing is half the battle is won already because there is that political driver to help developers build upwards. But as everybody's been saying, the devil is going to be in the detail. So yes, you will need to be very clear about the checks and balances that you need to go through, and also think about your appetite for commercial risk in light of this legal challenge.
Thank you, Anita. And thanks once again to the whole panel, Gill, Brendan, Anita and Laith, for their time and expertise on this very interesting topic. We'd also like to extend a thank you to Steen at Peritus Corporate Finance, who was due to join us today and is actually our co-host for today's webinar, but unfortunately those technical issues got the best of him and us. But I would like to thank everyone for joining us and for watching live. We will be publishing this webinar on Development Finance today in the next week or so, where you can catch up on some of these points, kind of reshare and think about what the panelists have said. And I think that wraps things up for this morning. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.